Tell me, do you feel safe in your own home? Do you check the locks twice before bed, listen for footsteps in the hallway, wonder if someone might be watching from the shadows? For most of us, home is our sanctuary. But what happens when that sanctuary becomes a trap? Valentine Ross fumbled with her keys outside her apartment door, exhaustion weighing heavy on her shoulders after another endless evening at the gallery. At 26, she had worked tirelessly to establish herself as a curator worth noticing in Chicago's competitive art scene. But tonight's opening had stretched past 11, and all she wanted was to collapse into bed with a cup of tea and pretend the world didn't exist for a few hours. The converted warehouse building in River North had seemed perfect when she'd found it 18 months ago. Industrial charm with exposed brick and massive windows, affordable rent for the neighborhood, and most importantly, a security system that had made her feel safe living alone. She'd never imagined that safety could be an illusion. Her key turned in the lock, but something felt wrong immediately. The door moved too easily, opening a fraction before she'd finished turning the key. Valentine's heart skipped as she stared at the gap between door and frame. She distinctly remembered locking it this morning, checking it twice as she'd developed the habit of doing ever since Derek had started his campaign of unwanted attention. Derek Morrison had been a colleague at her previous gallery position, charming initially, then persistent, then increasingly aggressive when she'd made it clear she wasn't interested in dating him. That had been 3 months ago, 3 months of escalating behavior that had driven her to leave her job and take the position at Meridian Gallery downtown. 3 months of flowers delivered to her apartment with cards that grew more possessive each time. 3 months of finding him waiting near her building, always with some excuse about being in the neighborhood. 3 months of feeling like prey. Valentine pushed the door open slowly, her pulse hammering in her throat. The hallway lights spilled into her apartment, illuminating the familiar space that suddenly felt foreign and threatening. She reached for the wall switch, fingers trembling slightly. The lights revealed her living room exactly as she'd left it that morning, except for one detail that made her blood freeze in her veins. A man sat in her reading chair as if he belonged there, one leg crossed casually over the other, hands folded in his lap with the kind of stillness that spoke of complete control. He was tall even sitting down, probably 6'2", with dark hair styled immaculately despite the late hour. His suit was expensive, the kind of tailored perfection that cost more than Valentine made in 2 months, and his olive skin and strong features suggested Mediterranean heritage. But it was his eyes that held her captive, a striking blue-gray that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. He made no move to stand or explain his presence. He simply watched her with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. Valentine's first instinct was to scream, to run, to grab her phone and call the police. But something in his posture, the way he held himself with contained power rather than aggression, made her pause. This wasn't Derek's desperate, invasive energy. This was something else entirely. "Your stalker has been watching this place for weeks," the stranger said, his voice carrying a slight accent that she couldn't place. "I've been watching him." The words hit her like ice water. Valentine gripped the door frame, her legs suddenly unsteady. "You've been what?" "There's a coffee shop across the street with large windows," he continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "He sits there every Tuesday and Thursday evening, watching your building. Takes photos with a telephoto lens when you come and go. Last week he followed you to the grocery store on Halsted. 3 days ago, he was here when you were at work, trying the service entrance." Valentine's mouth went dry. "How do you know all of this?" "Because I own this building," the man said simply. "And because men like him escalate. Always." She stared at him, trying to process the revelation that her mysterious landlord, whom she'd never met but had been paying rent to through a property management company for over a year, was sitting in her apartment like he had every right to be there. The lease had been handled entirely through intermediaries, the building ownership listed under some corporate entity she'd never bothered to research. "I don't understand," she whispered. He stood then, and Valentine's breath caught. He was larger than he'd appeared sitting down, broad shoulders filling out his suit jacket, moving with the kind of controlled grace that suggested physical confidence born of experience rather than gym workouts. There was something dangerous about him, something that whispered of a world where problems were solved through means that didn't involve calling the authorities. Your stalker broke into this apartment twice while you were at work, he said, his tone remaining calm despite the devastating words. He's been inside, touching your things, learning your routines. The standard locks on these doors are decorative at best. Valentine felt the room tilt. Her safe space, her sanctuary, had been violated in ways she hadn't even known to fear. She thought of all the evenings she'd come home alone, all the nights she'd slept peacefully thinking she was secure. Derek had been here, in her bedroom, handling her belongings, planning God knew what. Why are you telling me this? She managed to ask. And why are you here? The man studied her for a long moment, those blue-gray eyes seeming to catalog her fear, her vulnerability, her attempt to hold herself together in the face of information that shattered her sense of security. Because I don't tolerate threats to people under my protection, he said finally. And whether you knew it or not, living in my building makes you my responsibility. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Where are you right now? What city, what state? Because what I'm about to tell you might sound like something that only happens in movies, but I guarantee you that in your city, wherever you are, there are people like Derek Morrison walking around. People who think they have the right to take what they want from women who tell them no. And there are also people like the man sitting in Valentine's apartment, people who have the power to stop them. My name is Dante Moretti, he continued, and Valentine felt her stomach drop as recognition sparked. She'd heard that name whispered in certain circles, connected to stories of legitimate businesses with illegitimate backing, of problems that disappeared quietly and permanently. If the rumors were true, Dante Moretti was connected to organized crime in Chicago, the kind of man who operated in shadows and commanded respect through fear. She started, then stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. I'm someone who solves problems that the police can't or won't handle, Dante said simply. Your Derek Morrison is a problem that's about to escalate beyond leaving flowers and taking pictures. Men like him don't stop until they're stopped. Valentine sank onto her sofa, legs giving out as the full weight of her situation crashed over her. She'd been living in a fantasy of safety while a dangerous man had been systematically invading her life, planning something she didn't want to imagine. And now she was face to face with another dangerous man, one who claimed he wanted to help her, but whose very presence in her apartment demonstrated his own capacity for doing whatever he pleased. How long have you been watching me? She asked quietly. I've been aware of you since you signed the lease, Dante replied. But I started paying attention when your stalker began his surveillance 3 months ago. My people notice when someone starts watching one of my buildings. Your people? I have security throughout this neighborhood, Valentine. Cameras, contacts, ways of knowing when something doesn't belong. Derek Morrison doesn't belong anywhere near you. The certainty in his voice should have been comforting, but instead it highlighted just how far out of her depth she was. This wasn't a situation that could be handled with police reports and restraining orders. This was something darker, more serious than she'd wanted to admit to herself. What exactly are you proposing? Valentine asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Dante moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside slightly to look down at the street. Even from her position on the sofa, Valentine could see his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way he held himself like a man accustomed to command. First, we upgrade your security immediately. New locks, cameras, monitored alarm system. Second, you're never alone here until this is resolved. And third, Dante turned back to look at her, his expression hard as stone. Your stalker learns what happens when someone threatens what's mine to protect. The possessive note in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Valentine felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense that someone with real power was standing between her and the danger that had been circling closer each day. It was a seductive feeling, the promise of safety, even if it came from a man whose methods operated outside the law. She looked around her apartment, trying to reconcile this familiar space with the knowledge that Derek had been here, touching her belongings, violating her privacy in ways that made her skin crawl. Then she looked at Dante Moretti, this stranger who claimed ownership of her building and responsibility for her protection, whose presence filled her apartment with an energy that was both threatening and oddly reassuring. What would you need from me? She asked finally. Trust, Dante said simply, and the understanding that once I get involved, this situation gets resolved permanently. I don't do temporary fixes, Valentine. When I solve a problem, it stays solved. The weight of his words hung between them, loaded with implications she wasn't sure she was ready to fully understand. But as she sat in her violated sanctuary, knowing that Derek had been here in her most private space, she realized she was already in deeper than any conventional solution could address. I can't keep living like this, she whispered. You won't have to, Dante promised, and something in his tone told her he was a man who kept his word, whatever the cost. Dante moved to her kitchen counter, where Valentine noticed a laptop she definitely didn't recognize. When had he brought that in? How long had he been sitting in her apartment before she'd arrived home? The questions multiplied in her mind, but she found herself more curious than terrified, which probably said something disturbing about her current state of mind. I need to show you exactly what you're dealing with, Dante said, opening the laptop and angling it so she could see the screen from the sofa. His fingers moved over the keys with the same controlled precision he seemed to apply to everything, and Valentine found herself watching his hands. They were large, well-shaped, with a thin scar across the knuckles of his right hand that spoke of violence in his past. Yet when he gestured while speaking to her, those hands had remained carefully non-threatening, never moving too quickly or coming too close. The laptop screen filled with security footage, black and white images stamped with dates and times. Valentine recognized the view immediately. It was her apartment hallway, shot from an angle that captured her door clearly. This was last Tuesday, Dante said, clicking to start the video. You left for work at 8:15 that morning. Valentine watched herself leave her apartment, locking the door carefully and testing the handle before walking toward the elevator. The timestamp showed 8:17 a.m. Then Dante fast-forwarded to 10:43 a.m. A figure appeared in the hallway, and Valentine's blood turned to ice. Derek Morrison approached her door, carrying what looked like a small toolkit. He glanced around nervously, then knelt in front of her lock. He picked it, Valentine whispered, watching Derek work on her door with practiced efficiency. This wasn't some desperate, clumsy attempt. He knew what he was doing. Took him less than 3 minutes, Dante confirmed. He was inside for 47 minutes. Valentine watched Derek disappear into her apartment, and the timestamp raced forward until he emerged again, looking satisfied and carrying a small bag she hadn't noticed him bring in. What was in the bag? She asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Items of yours, Dante said simply. Underwear, a photo from your nightstand, a piece of jewelry. Trophies. Valentine's stomach lurched. The violation felt complete now, knowing Derek had been in her most private spaces, taking pieces of her life to do God knew what with them. She thought about all the times over the past few weeks when she'd felt like something was slightly off in her apartment, items not quite where she'd left them, a sense that someone had been there. She dismissed it as paranoia. There's more, Dante said, switching to another date. This was yesterday. The same scene played out, but this time Derek's confidence was greater. He unlocked her door in under 2 minutes and stayed inside for over an hour. When he emerged, he was carrying a different bag, larger this time. He's escalating, Valentine said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. This is escalating. Exactly. Men like Derek Morrison follow predictable patterns. First they watch, then they take things, then they start planning the next stage. Valentine looked up from the laptop screen to find Dante watching her carefully, those blue-gray eyes tracking her reactions with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people for dangerous tells. What's the next stage? She asked, though every instinct screamed that she didn't want to hear the answer. He stops taking things that smell like you and starts taking you, Dante said bluntly. Based on his pattern and escalation timeline, I'd estimate you have perhaps a week before he makes his move. The casual way he delivered this devastating prediction made it somehow worse. This wasn't emotional speculation, this was professional assessment from someone who understood predators and their methods. How do you know so much about this? Valentine asked. About how men like Derek think. Because I handle problems like this professionally, Dante replied. Not stalkers specifically, but men who take things that don't belong to them. Men who think their desires matter more than other people's rights or safety. I've seen what happens when they're allowed to continue. Valentine studied his face, noting the hard line of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to hold knowledge of things she'd never had to consider. There was something in his expression that spoke of experience with violence, both witnessed and delivered. What exactly do you do, Dante? I solve problems that conventional methods can't handle, he said carefully. I protect people who need protection from threats the legal system can't or won't address effectively. That's a very diplomatic way of saying you're in organized crime. Dante's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. I'm in the business of maintaining order when chaos threatens innocent people. Whether that falls under organized crime depends on your perspective and your relationship with conventional authority. The honesty was somehow more reassuring than denial would have been. Valentine had grown up in Chicago. She wasn't naive about the reality of power structures that operated parallel to official law enforcement. And sitting in her violated apartment, knowing Derek had been here touching her things while planning something worse, conventional authority felt very far away. Why do you care about my situation? Valentine asked. You said I'm your responsibility because I live in your building, but that seems like an unusual policy for a landlord. Dante closed the laptop and moved to the window again, his presence somehow making her small apartment feel even smaller. When he looked out at the street, his posture held the alertness of someone always watching for threats. I don't hurt innocent people, he said finally. I protect them. It's a code I live by, and it's served me well in my business. You're innocent, and you're under threat. That makes helping you both the right thing to do and good business practice. Valentine found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his nose, the way he held his shoulders like a man comfortable with command. There was something compelling about his certainty, his matter-of-fact approach to her crisis that made her feel less alone than she had in months. What are you proposing? She asked. Complete security upgrade for your apartment. New locks that can't be picked, cameras, monitored alarm system that connects directly to a security company I work with. You'll never come home to an empty apartment again. Someone will always sweep it first to make sure it's safe. That sounds expensive. I'll handle the cost. Valentine blinked. I can't let you pay for my security system. You're not letting me do anything. This is my building, my responsibility, and my decision. The possessive tone in his voice should have set off warning bells. But instead Valentine felt something she hadn't experienced since Derek's harassment began. Relief. Someone with real power was stepping between her and the danger. Someone who clearly had resources and connections Derek couldn't match. What else? She asked. I maintain a unit on the floor above yours. While this situation is active, I'll be staying there. Close enough to respond to any threat immediately, but far enough away to respect your privacy. You'd move in upstairs to watch over me? Temporarily, yes. Valentine tried to process this offer. Dante Moretti, this dangerous stranger who owned her building and claimed connections to organized crime, was proposing to completely reorganize his life around keeping her safe from Derek. It was overwhelming and oddly touching. Why would you do all of that for someone you don't even know? Because I've seen what men like your stalker do when they're not stopped, Dante said quietly. And because you remind me of someone I couldn't protect once. There was pain in his voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Valentine sensed a story there, trauma that explained his fierce protective instincts and his willingness to intervene in situations that didn't technically concern him. What happened to her? Valentine asked softly. She died because I wasn't careful enough, Dante replied. I won't make that mistake again. The raw honesty in his admission touched something deep in Valentine's chest. This wasn't just about building ownership or business codes. This was personal for him in ways that had nothing to do with her. I've been trying to handle this on my own, Valentine said finally. I filed police reports, but Derek hasn't done anything technically illegal until now. Following someone isn't a crime. Sending unwanted flowers isn't a crime. Even watching my building from public property isn't a crime. But breaking and entering is, Dante pointed out. Except proving he did it requires evidence the police would accept, and I'm guessing you obtained that footage through methods they wouldn't approve of. Dante's slight smile confirmed her suspicion. You're right. The cameras I have access to aren't exactly official city installations. So even with proof of what Derek's been doing, the legal system can't help me until after he escalates to whatever he's planning next. And by then it might be too late. Exactly. Which is why you need protection that works in real time, not legal consequences that only matter after you've been hurt. Valentine looked around her apartment again, trying to imagine it with Dante's security upgrades, knowing someone like him was watching over her. The idea should have felt like trading one threat for another, but instead it felt like finally having someone on her side who understood the stakes. "What would you need from me?" she asked. "Trust that I know how to handle this situation, understanding that my methods might not align with conventional approaches. An agreement that once I start protecting you, you let me do it thoroughly." Meaning? Meaning you don't try to handle Derek yourself if he contacts you. You don't go places alone until this is resolved. And you don't second-guess my security recommendations based on what feels normal or reasonable. Valentine considered this. Everything about Dante Moretti was outside the realm of normal or reasonable, but normal and reasonable hadn't protected her from Derek's escalating obsession. "How long would this arrangement last?" she asked. "Until the threat is permanently resolved." "And how exactly would that happen?" "Derek Morrison will be made to understand that continuing his harassment will have consequences he can't survive," Dante said simply. "He'll disappear from your life completely and never return." The calm certainty with which he delivered this promise sent a chill through Valentine, but it wasn't entirely fear. There was something seductive about having someone with real power promise to eliminate the threat that had been consuming her life with anxiety and sleepless nights. "I need to think about this," Valentine said finally. "Of course. But while you're thinking, Derek Morrison is planning. And his timeline won't wait for your comfort level with my involvement." Dante moved toward her door, and Valentine felt an unexpected pang of panic at the thought of being alone in her apartment after everything she'd learned. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To make some calls and arrange for your security upgrades to begin tomorrow morning," Dante replied. "I'll be upstairs if you need anything, and I'll know immediately if anyone approaches this apartment tonight." He paused at her door, looking back at her with those penetrating blue-gray eyes. "Valentine," he said quietly, "I know this is overwhelming. I know trusting me requires a leap of faith, but I've never failed to protect someone I've committed to protecting, and I won't start with you." After he left, Valentine sat alone in her apartment for the first time in hours, trying to process everything that had changed. 48 hours ago, her biggest problem had been Derek's unwanted attention and her fear of being alone. Now she knew Derek had been violating her home for weeks while planning something worse, and she had a dangerous stranger offering to solve her problems through methods she didn't want to examine too closely. But as she looked around her apartment, imagining Derek moving through her personal space and touching her belongings, she realized Dante was right about one thing: conventional solutions weren't going to be enough. Derek was escalating according to his own timeline, and that timeline wouldn't pause while she figured out how to feel comfortable with accepting help from a man whose business operated in shadows. Valentine picked up her phone to call her sister Lily, then put it down again. How could she explain any of this? That her stalker was breaking into her apartment to steal her underwear, or that her mysterious landlord had revealed himself to be connected to organized crime and was offering to eliminate her problems permanently. Instead, she moved through her apartment, trying to see it through Derek's eyes, wondering what he'd touched and what he'd taken. The violation felt complete and overwhelming, but underneath the disgust and fear was something else: relief that finally, someone with the power to stop Derek was paying attention. As she prepared for bed, Valentine found herself listening for sounds from the apartment above, oddly comforted by the knowledge that Dante Moretti was there, watching and waiting. For the first time in months, she felt like someone dangerous was on her side instead of hunting her. Tomorrow she would have to decide whether to trust him completely. Tonight, she was just grateful not to be alone. Valentine woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation in her hallway. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts. She lived alone. She didn't have overnight guests, and she definitely hadn't left coffee brewing. Then the events of the previous evening crashed back into her consciousness, and she realized the voices outside her door meant Dante's security upgrades were already beginning. She pulled on a robe and opened her door to find 3 men in work clothes installing something complex looking on her door frame while Dante supervised, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking like he'd been awake for hours. He was dressed more casually today, dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders. But his alertness and the way the workers deferred to him made it clear he was very much in command of the situation. "Good morning," he said, offering her one of the coffee cups. "I brought this from the place downstairs. 2 sugars, no cream, based on what I observed in your kitchen." The fact that he'd been paying attention to her coffee preferences felt intimate in a way that shouldn't have been comforting, but somehow was. Valentine accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma and feeling more human immediately. "How long have they been working?" she asked, watching one of the men install what looked like a sophisticated camera system. "Since 7. The new locks are already functional. These cameras connect to a monitoring system that will alert both of us if anyone approaches your door. The alarm system goes in next, then motion sensors for the windows." Valentine stepped into the hallway to get a better look at the equipment being installed. Everything was sleek and professional, clearly expensive, and definitely not the kind of security system her building management would have approved for a rental unit. "What if my lease doesn't allow modifications like this?" she asked. "I own the building," Dante reminded her with a slight smile. "I think we'll manage to work something out with the landlord." "Right." She was still adjusting to that reality. How exactly does someone in your line of work end up owning residential real estate? Legitimate businesses provide excellent cover for less legitimate activities, Dante said matter-of-factly. "And I found that owning the places where people live gives me better control over their safety." The casual way he discussed using real estate investments to facilitate organized crime should have alarmed her, but Valentine found herself more interested than frightened. There was something refreshingly honest about his approach, no pretense or deception about what he was or what he did. One of the workers approached Dante and spoke quietly in what sounded like Italian. Dante's expression darkened as he responded in the same language, his tone sharp enough that the man nodded quickly and returned to work with obvious urgency. "Problem?" Valentine asked. "Someone was watching the building this morning from the coffee shop across the street," Dante said. "Male, mid-30s, left when my people started paying attention to him." "Derek," Valentine whispered, her stomach clenching with familiar anxiety. "Most likely. Which means he's aware that your security situation has changed, and he's trying to assess the new threat level." Dante pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking in rapid Italian before hanging up. Within minutes, Valentine could see 2 men in casual clothes taking positions on the street below, one near the coffee shop and another by the building entrance. "You have people watching for him now," she observed. "I have people watching everything now," Dante corrected. "Derek Morrison has moved from nuisance to active threat. That changes how I handle the situation." Valentine watched the street scene below, noting how naturally Dante's people blended into the urban environment while maintaining clear sight lines and communication. This wasn't amateur security, this was professional surveillance with military precision. "Have you eaten?" Dante asked, drawing her attention back to him. "Not yet. I usually just grab something quick before work." "Not today. Today you eat a proper breakfast while I explain the new protocols." The authoritative tone should have bristled, but instead Valentine found herself nodding. Something about Dante's complete confidence in handling her situation made it easy to let him take charge of details she'd been struggling with alone. They went into her apartment, where Dante moved through her kitchen with surprising familiarity, pulling ingredients from her refrigerator and cabinets like he'd planned this meal in advance. Watching him cook was unexpectedly mesmerizing. His hands moved with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else, cracking eggs and slicing vegetables with efficient grace. "You know your way around a kitchen," Valentine observed, settling at her small dining table to watch him work. "I learned early that being able to take care of basic needs yourself is essential for independence," Dante replied, without looking up from the pan, where he was preparing what smelled like a perfect omelet. "My mother insisted on teaching me before I left home." The mention of his mother humanized him in a way Valentine hadn't expected. It was easier to think of Dante as some kind of criminal mastermind than as someone's son who'd been taught to cook breakfast properly. "Are you close with your family?" she asked. "My mother lives in Sicily now. I send money regularly and visit when I can, but she worries about my business choices." Mothers have a way of seeing through justifications to the heart of what their children really are. There was sadness in his voice, regret for the distance his choices had created between him and someone he obviously loved. Valentine found herself wanting to know more about the man behind the controlled exterior, the person who sent money to his mother and learned to cook from her before leaving home for a life that would worry her. Dante plated the omelet with fresh herbs and set it in front of her with a flourish that made her smile despite everything else going on in her life. "This is beautiful," she said, taking a bite and discovering it was as delicious as it looked. And I definitely don't deserve this level of service. Everyone deserves to eat well, especially when they're under stress, Dante replied, pouring himself more coffee and settling across from her. Besides, I needed to discuss the new security protocols with you anyway. Valentine ate while Dante explained the enhanced alarm system, the check-in procedures with his security team, and the emergency contact numbers that would connect her directly to people who could respond faster than police. It was comprehensive and slightly overwhelming, but also deeply reassuring to know that so much thought and resources were being dedicated to keeping her safe. What about when I'm at work? Valentine asked. The gallery doesn't exactly seem like the kind of place that would welcome your security people. I've already spoken with the owner of Meridian Gallery, Dante said casually. Additional security has been arranged for the building, and someone will be monitoring the area while you're there. You called my boss. Valentine stared at him. What did you tell him? That a valued tenant in one of my properties was experiencing harassment issues, and I wanted to ensure her workplace safety as a courtesy, Dante replied. Richard Meridian and I have done business before. He was very accommodating. Valentine tried to process this information. Dante had contacts throughout the city, people who took his calls and accommodated his requests without question. The scope of his influence was becoming clear, and it was both impressive and slightly intimidating. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The display showed her gallery's number, and Valentine felt her stomach drop even as she answered. Meridian Gallery, this is Valentine. Valentine, thank God you answered. This is Richard. I need you to come in as soon as possible. Someone broke into the gallery last night. Valentine's blood turned to ice. What happened? Your office was vandalized. Nothing was stolen as far as we can tell, but someone went through all your files, destroyed some of your personal items. The police are here now taking statements. Valentine looked at Dante, whose expression had gone deadly serious as he listened to her side of the conversation. I'll be right there, she told Richard, already standing and reaching for her clothes. No, Dante said quietly but firmly. You won't. Valentine covered the phone. Richard, I need to call you back, she said, hanging up and turning to face Dante's implacable stare. Derek escalated to your workplace, Dante said. This isn't random vandalism, this is a message. He's telling you that he can reach you anywhere, that changing your security at home won't protect you everywhere else. I have to go assess the damage, Valentine protested. It's my job, my office, my responsibility. It's a crime scene that Derek Morrison is probably watching right now to see how you react, Dante countered. Walking into that situation would be exactly what he wants, you isolated and exposed while dealing with the emotional impact of his latest violation. Valentine felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. Derek had found a way to invade her professional life too, destroying her sense of safety in the one place that had remained untouched by his harassment. The gallery was her sanctuary, her pride, her proof that she was building something meaningful despite everything else falling apart. He's destroying everything, she whispered. My home, my work, my sense of control over my own life. Dante stood and moved to her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body without actually touching her. That's exactly what he wants you to feel, Dante said quietly. Helpless, isolated, dependent on him to make it stop. It's a classic predator pattern: destroy your victim's support systems until you become their only option for relief. Valentine looked up at him, noting the hard anger in his blue-gray eyes that wasn't directed at her, but at the man who was systematically dismantling her life. What do I do? She asked. How do I handle this without letting him win? You let me handle it, Dante said simply. You stay safe while I make sure Derek Morrison understands that his campaign against you ends today. The possessive protectiveness in his voice sent a shiver through Valentine that wasn't entirely about fear. There was something compelling about having someone powerful enough to stop Derek's harassment, who was clearly furious on her behalf. I can't hide forever, Valentine said. I can't let him drive me out of my job and my life. You won't have to, Dante promised. But right now, going to your gallery would be walking into a trap he specifically set for you. Instead, you're going to pack a bag and move into my penthouse until this situation is permanently resolved. Valentine blinked. Your penthouse? The unit above yours is comfortable, but not secure enough for the level of threat Derek represents now that he's escalating to workplace harassment. My penthouse has security systems that would make government buildings envious. Moving in with you seems like a significant escalation on my part too, Valentine pointed out. The alternative is waiting here for Derek to decide that breaking into places you spend time isn't enough, and he needs to take more direct action, Dante replied. I won't let that happen. The finality in his voice made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. Valentine looked around her apartment, trying to imagine packing up and moving into Dante's space, becoming even more dependent on a man she'd known for less than 24 hours. But as her phone rang again with another call from the gallery, probably with more details about Derek's destruction of her office, she realized Dante was right. Derek had moved from harassment to active sabotage of her life, and staying in her apartment pretending she could handle this alone was naive at best and dangerous at worst. How long would I stay with you? She asked. Until Derek Morrison is no longer a threat to you, Dante said. However long that takes. Valentine studied his face, noting the determination there, the complete confidence that he could resolve a situation that had been consuming her life for months. It should have been impossible to trust someone so completely so quickly, but everything about Dante's approach to her crisis had been competent and protective. What would the living arrangement be like? She asked. I mean, what would you expect from me? I'd expect you to follow security protocols and let me keep you safe, Dante said simply. Beyond that, you're a guest in my home, not a prisoner. You have your own space, your own privacy, your own choices about everything except exposing yourself to Derek's reach. The careful way he outlined boundaries was reassuring. This wasn't about trapping her or taking advantage of her vulnerability. This was about providing sanctuary while he eliminated the threat. Valentine looked at her phone as it rang again. Richard calling for the third time to deal with Derek's latest escalation. She thought about returning to a workplace that had been violated, sitting in an office where Derek had gone through her personal belongings and destroyed things that mattered to her. Then she looked at Dante, this dangerous man who'd appeared in her life offering protection and solutions, whose presence made her feel safer than she'd felt since Derek's harassment began. I'll need to pack my art supplies, she said finally, and my laptop. If I can't go to the gallery, I'll have to work from wherever I'm staying. Dante's smile was the first completely unguarded expression she'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face from intimidating to devastatingly attractive. Pack whatever you need, he said. My people will collect anything else you think of later. As Valentine moved through her apartment gathering clothes and personal items, she was hyper-aware of Dante's presence, the way he moved through her space with respectful efficiency, never touching her belongings, but somehow managing to help without being intrusive. In the elevator up to the penthouse, they stood closer together than they had before, and Valentine found herself noticing details about him that had nothing to do with his protective capabilities. The way his cologne mixed with something that was purely him, clean and masculine and oddly comforting. The way he held himself with controlled power that suggested physical confidence earned through experience. The way his hands remained perfectly still at his sides despite the confined space, respecting her personal boundaries even when proximity made casual contact inevitable. The penthouse revealed a different side of Dante entirely. Where she'd expected ostentation or criminal cliches, she found elegant simplicity, clean lines, expensive but understated furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was the home of someone with refined tastes and significant resources, but also someone who valued function over display. Your room is down this hallway, Dante said, leading her to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. Private bathroom, walk-in closet, and these windows don't face the street, so you can leave the curtains open without security concerns. Valentine set down her bags and looked around the beautiful space, trying to process that this was her new reality until Derek's threat was eliminated. The room was clearly guest quarters, but it was appointed with the same careful attention to detail as the rest of the penthouse. This is incredible, she said honestly. I feel like I'm staying in a 5-star hotel. You're staying in a fortress, Dante corrected. But there's no reason a fortress can't be comfortable. Valentine turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something that looked like satisfaction mixed with protectiveness, and something else that made her pulse quicken. Thank you, she said quietly. for all of this. I know it's disrupting your life, and I don't take that lightly. My life needed disrupting, Dante replied, and there was something in his voice that suggested loneliness, isolation that he'd accepted as necessary until her crisis had given him reason to change his patterns. As Valentine began unpacking her things into the elegant dresser and spacious closet, she was aware of Dante's presence throughout the penthouse, the sound of phone calls in rapid Italian, the opening and closing of doors as people came and went on business she didn't ask about. For the first time in months, she felt completely safe. Derek Morrison had no idea where she was, no access to her new location, and no way to reach her through the security Dante had constructed around them both. But as evening approached and Valentine found herself sharing dinner with Dante in his sophisticated kitchen, she realized that feeling safe was only part of what was happening between them. There was an undeniable attraction building, a pull toward this dangerous man who'd stepped into her life and rearranged everything to protect her. The way he moved through his own space, confident and graceful, the way his attention focused completely on her when she spoke, the way his rare smiles transformed his entire face, all of it was drawing her in despite every rational reason to maintain emotional distance. Valentine was falling for her protector, and that realization was almost as frightening as Derek's escalating threats had been. Because unlike Derek's unwanted attention, her growing feelings for Dante were entirely mutual, and the intensity building between them felt like it could consume everything in its path. Valentine woke in the guest suite to sunlight streaming through windows that offered a breathtaking view of Chicago's skyline. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts. The bed was too comfortable, the room too elegant, the silence too complete. Then memory returned, and with it the surreal realization that she was living in Dante Moretti's penthouse, while he orchestrated the elimination of her stalker through methods she preferred not to examine too closely. She found Dante in the kitchen, already dressed for what appeared to be a business meeting, charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, white shirt that contrasted beautifully with his olive skin, silver watch that probably cost more than Valentine's annual salary. He was reading something on his tablet while drinking espresso from a cup, so small it looked delicate in his large hands. "Good morning," he said without looking up. "There's fresh coffee, and I had my housekeeper stock anything you might want for breakfast." Valentine opened the refrigerator to find it filled with high-end groceries she definitely couldn't afford on her gallery salary: imported cheeses, organic produce, artisanal everything. The disparity between their worlds was becoming impossible to ignore. "This is too much," she said, closing the refrigerator and turning to face him. "All of this. The penthouse, the security, the groceries that probably cost more than I spend on food in a month. I can't let you keep spending money on me." Dante looked up from his tablet, those blue-gray eyes studying her with careful attention. "Money isn't an issue for me, Valentine. And keeping you safe isn't a favor I'm doing for you, it's something I need to do for myself." "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense if you understand that I can't function knowing someone innocent is being hunted while I have the power to stop it," Dante said simply. "Your safety has become essential to my peace of mind." The intensity with which he delivered this explanation made Valentine's pulse quicken. There was something deeply personal in his need to protect her, something that went beyond building ownership or professional codes. "Why is protection so important to you?" Valentine asked, settling at the breakfast bar across from him. "I mean, beyond the general principle of helping people in trouble." Dante was quiet for so long that Valentine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried pain that had been carefully controlled but never fully healed. "I had a younger sister," he said quietly. "Isabel. She was 24, finishing graduate school, planning to be a teacher. She had this way of seeing the good in everyone, believing people were better than they usually proved to be." Valentine heard the past tense and felt her chest tighten with anticipated grief. "A man became obsessed with her," Dante continued. "Started with flowers and notes, escalated to following her, breaking into her apartment. She was afraid but didn't want to tell me because she knew what I'd do to solve the problem." "What happened?" Valentine asked softly. "She tried to handle it herself. Filed police reports, got a restraining order, changed her routine. All the things people tell women to do when men decide they own them. And he killed her for it." The stark finality of those words hit Valentine like physical force. She thought of her own attempts to handle Derek through conventional channels, how helpless she'd felt when his harassment escalated beyond what legal remedies could address. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "That's devastating." "He made it look like an accident," Dante said, his voice hard with remembered fury. "Car crash on a rainy night. Brake lines that had been carefully tampered with. By the time I realized what had really happened and tracked him down, Isabel had been dead for 6 months." Valentine didn't ask what had happened to Isabel's killer. The expression on Dante's face made that outcome very clear. "She was everything good about our family," Dante continued. "Everything pure that hadn't been touched by the choices I'd made in business. And I failed to protect her because I respected her independence more than I trusted my instincts about the threat she was facing." Now Valentine understood the intensity of his response to her situation, the way he'd taken control without asking permission, the comprehensive security measures that seemed excessive until viewed through the lens of his devastating loss. "You think I'm like her," Valentine said. "That I'm too trusting, too willing to believe Derek will stop if I just handle it the right way. I think you're strong and intelligent and capable of making good decisions about most threats," Dante replied. "But men like Derek Morrison operate outside the realm of normal human behavior, and responding to them with normal human decency is like bringing a knife to a gunfight." Valentine absorbed this, thinking about her own attempts to be reasonable with Derek, to give him the benefit of the doubt even as his attention became increasingly invasive and threatening. "Tell me about him," Dante said suddenly. "How this started. I need to understand his psychology to predict his next moves." Valentine found herself explaining Derek's initial charm, how he'd seemed like a thoughtful colleague when they'd worked together at her previous gallery, how his interest had seemed flattering at first, his persistence almost romantic until it crossed the line into harassment. "He was never violent," she said, "never even raised his voice. But there was something in the way he looked at me, like he was cataloging everything about me for later use. And when I told him I wasn't interested in dating him, he acted like I just hadn't understood his intentions clearly enough." "Classic narcissistic predator behavior," Dante observed. "They believe their desires supersede their target's autonomy. So rejection isn't really rejection, it's just miscommunication that needs to be corrected through persistence." When Derek's flowers started arriving at her new job, Valentine had tried to convince herself it was romantic persistence rather than stalking. When he began appearing near her apartment building, she'd rationalized it as coincidence. Even when his notes became increasingly possessive, she'd hesitated to label his behavior as dangerous because it felt like an overreaction. "I kept thinking I was being paranoid," Valentine admitted, "that I was reading too much into normal romantic interest because I've always been cautious about dating." "That's exactly what he was counting on," Dante said. "Predators rely on their victims' social conditioning to excuse increasingly invasive behavior as romance or persistence rather than predation." Dante's phone buzzed with a text message, and his expression darkened as he read it. "Problem?" Valentine asked. "Derek was outside the building an hour ago," Dante said. "He knows you're not in your apartment anymore, and he's trying to figure out where you've gone." Valentine felt the familiar clench of anxiety in her stomach. Even here, surrounded by Dante's security and protection, Derek was still hunting her. "What does that mean for your plan?" "It means his obsession is escalating faster than I anticipated," Dante replied grimly. "And desperate men take desperate measures." The intercom buzzed, and Dante pressed a button that connected him to building security. "Yes, Marco and Paolo are here for the meeting," came the response. "Send them up," Dante said, then turned to Valentine. "I need to handle some business. You're welcome to stay here or explore the penthouse, but please don't leave this floor without talking to me first." Valentine nodded, watching as Dante moved through the space with sudden urgency, his entire demeanor shifting from protective companion to business commander. She'd glimpsed this side of him before, but seeing it fully activated was both impressive and slightly intimidating. 2 men arrived within minutes, both carrying themselves with the kind of alert confidence that suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds. They greeted Dante in Italian, then switched to English when they noticed Valentine's presence. "This is Valentine," Dante said simply. "The situation we discussed." Both men nodded respectfully in her direction, and Valentine realized they'd been briefed about her circumstances and her presence in Dante's home. "What's the status on Morrison?" Dante asked. He's been asking questions around the neighborhood, one of the men replied, trying to find out where she went, who she might be staying with. He approached the building manager this morning claiming to be her cousin. The building manager knows better than to provide information about tenants, especially when I've specifically flagged this situation, Dante said. Morrison's getting more agitated, the second man added. Less careful about being seen, more direct in his approaches. Whatever timeline he's operating on, it's accelerating. Valentine listened to this discussion of Derek's escalating behavior with growing unease. The methodical way Dante's people tracked and analyzed the threat was reassuring, but it also highlighted just how serious her situation had become. I want 24-hour surveillance on Morrison, Dante instructed. Full detail, rotating shifts, monitoring his communications if possible. And I want to know immediately if he approaches anyone connected to Valentine's family, friends, co-workers. Valentine's blood chilled. My sister, she said suddenly. Derek knows I have a younger sister in college. If he can't find me, he might try to use her as leverage. Where does she go to school? Dante asked immediately. Northwestern, Valentine replied. Her name is Lily Ross. She's 22, lives in the dorms on campus. Oh God, I need to call her. I need to warn her. Give me her information, Dante said to one of his men. I want protection on her within the hour. While Dante's people made calls and arrangements, Valentine tried to reach Lily on her cell phone. It went straight to voicemail, which wasn't unusual. Lily was notorious for forgetting to charge her phone, but given the circumstances, it sent Valentine's anxiety spiraling. She's not answering, Valentine said, trying to keep the panic from her voice. College students are hard to reach during the day, Dante said reasonably. My people will locate her on campus and make sure she's safe. But as the morning stretched into afternoon with no contact from Lily and reports from Northwestern that she hadn't attended her scheduled classes, Valentine's fear crystallized into certainty that Derek had already made his next move. She's missing, Valentine whispered when Dante's team reported that Lily's roommate hadn't seen her since the night before. Derek has her. Dante's expression went deadly cold, the transformation from protective companion to dangerous predator, so complete that Valentine felt a chill of fear that wasn't directed at her, but at what he was capable of when someone threatened what he'd claimed to protect. We'll find her, Dante said with absolute certainty. And we'll make Derek Morrison regret the day he decided to escalate this situation beyond you. The quiet fury in his voice promised violence that Valentine didn't want to imagine, but was grateful existed on her behalf. Lily was the only family she had left, the one person in the world whose safety mattered more than her own. What do we do? Valentine asked. You stay here where you're safe, Dante replied. I mobilize everything I have to find your sister and eliminate the threat to both of you permanently. Valentine wanted to argue, to insist on being involved in finding Lily, but the look in Dante's eyes made it clear that Derek Morrison had crossed a line that moved this situation far beyond negotiation or conventional rescue. As Dante made calls and issued orders in rapid Italian, coordinating resources that Valentine couldn't begin to imagine, she realized that accepting his protection had drawn her into a world where problems were solved through methods that operated outside legal boundaries. But watching him command absolute loyalty from dangerous men while orchestrating Lily's rescue, Valentine found herself grateful for Dante's willingness to operate in shadows if it meant bringing her sister home safely. The afternoon passed in tense waiting, with Dante's people reporting Derek's movements through the city while other teams searched for any sign of Lily. Valentine paced the penthouse like a caged animal, useless in a situation that required skills and connections she didn't possess. When Dante finally approached her as evening fell, there was something in his expression that made her stomach drop. We found them, he said simply. Derek has your sister in a warehouse on the south side. He's demanding to see you in exchange for her release. The classic predator endgame, Valentine realized. Derek had taken the one thing that would guarantee her compliance, counting on her love for Lily to override every survival instinct. What's the plan? She asked. The plan is that Derek Morrison learns what happens when someone threatens my family, Dante said quietly. Your family? You're mine to protect now, Valentine. That makes your sister my responsibility too. And I don't negotiate with men who hurt innocent people to get what they want. The possessive certainty in his voice should have alarmed her, But instead Valentine felt something settle in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with belonging. Dante had claimed her and Lily both, and that claim came with the full weight of his power and protection. As Dante prepared to leave with his team, coordinating an operation that would end Derek's threat permanently, Valentine realized she trusted him completely. Not just with her safety, but with her heart, with her sister's life, with a future she was only beginning to imagine. When he paused at the door to look back at her, Valentine saw past the dangerous exterior to the man who'd lost his sister and refused to let history repeat itself. "Bring her home," she said simply. "I will," Dante promised. "And then this ends tonight." After he left, Valentine waited in the penthouse surrounded by luxury that felt empty without his presence, counting minutes and praying to whatever powers might be listening that the man she was falling in love with would bring her sister back safely and find his way home to her. The hours after Dante left stretched into an eternity of helpless waiting. Valentine paced the penthouse like a caged animal, checking her phone obsessively for updates that didn't come, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at a city that suddenly felt vast and threatening rather than beautiful. Every worst-case scenario played through her mind on endless repeat. Lily terrified and alone with Derek. Derek's obsession finally reaching its breaking point. The confrontation going wrong, and both Lily and Dante paying the price for Valentine's inability to handle her stalker before he escalated to kidnapping. When her phone finally rang at 9:30, Valentine's hands shook as she answered. "We found the warehouse," came Dante's voice, calm despite the background noise that sounded like vehicles and urgent conversation. "Derek has your sister in an abandoned building on the south side. Minimal security, but he's definitely armed." Valentine's knees gave out, and she sank onto the sofa. "Is Lily okay? Have you seen her?" "My people have visual confirmation. She's alive and appears unharmed, but she's restrained and obviously frightened. Derek is with her, and he's clearly unstable." "What's your plan?" Valentine asked, though part of her didn't want to know the details of how Dante intended to resolve a hostage situation. "Fast extraction, minimal engagement, Derek neutralized before he can hurt your sister," Dante said with professional detachment. "This ends in the next 30 minutes. Valentine heard the certainty in his voice, the complete confidence of a man who'd planned and executed operations like this before. It should have been reassuring, but the stakes were too high for her to feel anything except paralyzing fear. "Dante," she said quietly, "if something goes wrong, if you have to choose between getting Lily out safely and your own safety, choose Lily. Promise me." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Dante's voice came back harder than she'd ever heard it. "I'm not losing either of you tonight, Valentine. That's not an option I'm willing to consider." The line went dead, leaving Valentine alone with her terror and the awful knowledge that she could do nothing but wait, while the two people who mattered most to her walked into a confrontation with a man who'd already proven he was willing to hurt innocent people to get what he wanted. 45 minutes later, her phone rang again. "It's over," Dante said without preamble. "Lily is safe. Derek won't be bothering anyone ever again." Relief hit Valentine so hard she couldn't speak for several seconds. "Lily's okay? Really okay?" "Shaken up, but unharmed. She's tough, your sister." Gave Derek a harder time than he expected, apparently. Valentine laughed through sudden tears, picturing Lily's stubborn refusal to be intimidated even by a dangerous stalker. "Thank God. When can I see her?" "We're bringing her to you now. She'll probably want to go home to her dorm after she's had time to process what happened, but I thought you should see for yourself that she's safe." When the elevator doors opened 20 minutes later and Lily walked into the penthouse flanked by Dante and two of his men, Valentine couldn't hold back the sob of relief that escaped her throat. Her sister was pale and obviously shaken, but whole and unhurt and gloriously alive. "Lily," Valentine whispered, crossing the room in 3 quick steps and pulling her sister into a fierce embrace. "I'm okay," Lily said, her voice steadier than Valentine expected. "Scared out of my mind, but okay. Your boyfriend here is very good at what he does." Valentine looked over Lily's shoulder at Dante, noting the controlled tension in his posture that suggested the evening's events had affected him more than his calm voice had indicated. "What happened?" Valentine asked as they settled on the sofa, Lily curled against her side like she hadn't done since they were children. Derek grabbed me outside my dorm, Lily explained. Used some story about you being in an accident and needing to see me immediately. I was stupid enough to get in his car before I realized something was wrong. You're not stupid, Valentine said fiercely. You were worried about me, and he took advantage of that. He kept talking about how you belonged with him, how other people were keeping you from understanding your real feelings, Lily continued. He was completely delusional, Val. He honestly believed you were in love with him and just confused about it. The classic stalker psychology, Valentine realized. Derek had constructed an entire fantasy relationship in his mind, with her compliance as the only missing piece. How did Dante find you? Valentine asked. Surveillance cameras throughout the city, traffic analysis, and Derek's complete lack of operational security, Dante said from where he stood by the window, still alert despite the successful resolution. Once we knew he had her, tracking his movements was straightforward. What about Derek? Lily asked quietly. What happened to him? Dante's expression went carefully neutral. Derek Morrison will never threaten you or anyone else again. That's all you need to know about his fate. Valentine understood the diplomatic phrasing. Derek was dead, eliminated with the efficient finality that Dante brought to problems that couldn't be solved through legal channels. She should have felt horror at being connected to someone's death, but all she felt was profound relief that the threat was permanently over. After Lily had been safely returned to Northwestern with a security detail that would remain discreet but vigilant, Valentine found herself alone with Dante for the first time since the crisis had begun. The penthouse felt different now, charged with the aftermath of violence and the intensity of emotions that had been carefully controlled during the emergency. Dante stood at the window again, still dressed in the tactical gear he'd worn for Lily's rescue, his profile hard with residual tension from the evening's operation. How are you doing? Valentine asked, approaching him carefully. I'm fine, Dante replied automatically, but Valentine could see the lie in the rigid line of his shoulders, the way his hands remained clenched at his sides. No, you're not, she said quietly. You're processing what could have gone wrong tonight. You're thinking about your sister and how things ended differently for her. Dante was silent for so long that Valentine thought he might not respond. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the vulnerability he'd been hiding behind operational efficiency. When I saw Lily in that warehouse, tied up and terrified because some predator was using her to get to you, it was like watching Isabel's situation all over again. Except this time I had the power to stop it before it became a tragedy. Valentine reached out and touched his arm, feeling the tension coiled beneath the tactical fabric. But you did stop it, she said. You saved her. You saved both of us. Dante turned to face her, and Valentine saw past his controlled exterior to the man who'd been terrified of losing someone else he'd committed to protecting. I was so afraid, he admitted quietly. Not of Derek or the operation, but of failing you the way I failed Isabel. Of having to tell you that I'd let your sister die because I wasn't fast enough or smart enough or ruthless enough to stop him. Valentine felt her heart break for the pain he'd been carrying, the guilt that drove his need to protect innocent people from predators who operated outside society's rules. You didn't fail anyone tonight, she said firmly. You brought Lily home safely and eliminated a threat that could have destroyed both our lives. You're not the man who couldn't save his sister anymore, Dante. You're the man who saved mine. Something shifted in Dante's expression, the careful control giving way to raw emotion that he'd been holding back. I love you, he said quietly. I know it's too soon and the circumstances are insane, but watching you trust me with your sister's life, seeing you choose to stay in my world despite everything you've learned about what I'm capable of, I can't pretend this is just about protection anymore. Valentine felt her breath catch. The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable and completely unexpected despite the intimacy that had been building since their first night together. I love you too, she replied without hesitation. I probably have since that first morning when you brought me coffee and explained how you were going to keep me safe. You've rearranged your entire life around protecting me and Lily, and I've never felt more cared for or more valued. Dante moved closer, his hands coming up to frame her face with gentle reverence that contrasted completely with the dangerous capabilities she'd witnessed. You know what I am, he said quietly. What my business requires, what being with me means. This isn't a normal life I'm offering you. Valentine leaned into his touch, feeling the calluses on his fingers that spoke of violence alongside the tenderness that spoke of deep care. "I don't want a normal life if it means being without you," she said simply. "I want whatever life we can build together, as long as it includes you keeping me and the people I love safe from men like Derek." Dante's kiss was gentle at first, testing and careful, then deeper as Valentine responded with enthusiasm that left no doubt about her feelings or her commitment to accepting his world as her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Valentine felt like something fundamental had shifted between them. This wasn't just attraction or gratitude anymore. This was love declared and accepted, a future chosen despite its complications. "What happens now?" Valentine asked. "Now we figure out how to build a life together," Dante said. "You go back to work when you're ready. I continue handling business that keeps people like Derek from hurting innocent people, and we learn how to be partners in a world that's more complicated than either of us planned for." Valentine smiled, thinking about returning to the gallery with the security of knowing Derek's threat was permanently eliminated, about building a relationship with a man whose protection came with complete devotion. "Will you teach me about your world?" she asked. "I don't want to be naive about what you do or why it matters. If I'm going to be part of your life, I want to understand all of it." Dante's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face with unguarded happiness. "I'll teach you everything you want to know," he promised. "And you can teach me about art and galleries and all the things that matter to you that I've never had time to appreciate." As they moved through the penthouse together, finally relaxed after the crisis had passed, Valentine marveled at how completely her life had changed in just a few days. She'd gone from being hunted by a dangerous stalker to being protected by an even more dangerous man who loved her enough to eliminate any threat to her safety. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but looking at Dante as he moved through his space with the confidence of a man at peace with his choices, Valentine realized it was exactly the life she wanted. Derek Morrison had tried to destroy her sense of safety and autonomy, but instead he'd led her to a man who would spend the rest of his life ensuring she never had to be afraid again. And for the first time since Derek's harassment had begun, Valentine felt completely, permanently safe. The threat was over. Her sister was protected, and the man she loved had proven he would do whatever it took to keep them both secure in a world that could be dangerous for people who couldn't protect themselves. It was enough. It was everything. 6 months later, Valentine woke in Dante's arms as dawn light filtered through the penthouse windows, painting their bedroom in shades of gold and rose. His breathing was steady and peaceful against her hair, one arm wrapped securely around her waist, even in sleep, as if his subconscious refused to let her drift too far away. The transition from guest to permanent resident had been seamless in ways that still surprised her. Her clothes now filled half the walk-in closet. Her art supplies had taken over the spare room that Dante had converted into a studio, and her coffee preferences had become his morning routine. They'd settled into domestic rhythms that felt like they'd been perfected over years rather than months. Dante stirred as she moved, tightening his hold instinctively before his eyes opened to focus on her face with a kind of attention that still made her pulse quicken. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured, voice rough with sleep and affection. "Good morning yourself," Valentine replied, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Sleep well?" "Always, when you're here," Dante said simply, capturing her hand to press a kiss to her palm. It was true, she'd noticed. The hypervigilance that seemed to define his waking hours disappeared completely when they were alone together, as if her presence allowed him to finally relax his guard. Just as his protection had given her the first real peace she'd experienced since Derek's harassment began. The gallery had reopened to great success after a month-long renovation that had coincidentally coincided with enhanced security measures throughout the building. Richard Meridian hadn't asked questions about the sudden improvements, but Valentine suspected he understood exactly who was responsible for the upgrade and why. Her work had flourished in ways she'd never expected. Without the constant anxiety of Derek's stalking consuming her mental energy, she'd thrown herself into curating with renewed passion, developing exhibitions that were receiving attention from critics and collectors throughout the Midwest. The gallery's profile was rising, and with it, her reputation as a curator worth watching. Dante had been careful never to interfere with her professional independence, though she'd gradually become aware of his support in subtle ways. New contacts who appeared with valuable pieces to display, collectors who specifically requested to work with her, opportunities that seemed to arise with suspicious frequency. When she'd confronted him about it, he'd simply said that talented people deserved platforms worthy of their abilities. Coffee? Dante asked, already reaching for his phone to check messages that had arrived overnight. Please, Valentine replied, settling back against the pillows to watch him move through their morning routine. Even after months together, she remained fascinated by the contrast between his public persona and his private self. The dangerous authority that commanded absolute respect from dangerous men dissolved into gentle attentiveness when they were alone, as if she'd unlocked a version of him that no one else was permitted to see. Lily's voice echoed from the kitchen 15 minutes later, chattering away in rapid Spanish with Elena, Dante's housekeeper, who'd taken it upon herself to teach Valentine's sister to cook properly during her regular weekend visits. Your sister is becoming more Italian than some of my cousins, Dante observed with amusement as he handed Valentine her coffee. She loves the attention, Valentine replied, and the fact that you treat her like family instead of an obligation. The relationship between Dante and Lily had developed into something like an overprotective older brother dynamic, with Dante ensuring her security at Northwestern while respecting her independence, and Lily alternately teasing him about his intensity and fiercely defending his relationship with Valentine to anyone who questioned it. After breakfast, they settled in Dante's study while he handled business calls and Valentine worked on proposals for upcoming exhibitions. The comfortable parallel focus was something they'd perfected over months of learning to share space without interfering with each other's work. Valentine's attention was caught by Dante's sudden stillness during a call conducted entirely in rapid Italian. His expression had gone dangerous in the way she'd learned to recognize, though she'd also learned it was never directed at her. Problem? She asked quietly when he hung up. Minor territorial dispute that needs attention, Dante replied. Nothing that affects us directly, but I'll need to handle it personally. Valentine nodded, understanding that some aspects of his business required capabilities only he could provide. She'd learned not to ask for details about operations that ventured into violence, trusting him to protect her from knowledge that might burden her unnecessarily. How long will you be gone? She asked. 2 days, maybe 3. Are you comfortable staying here alone, or would you prefer to stay with Lily at Northwestern? I'll be fine here, Valentine assured him. This place is more secure than most government buildings, and besides, I have that exhibition opening to prepare for. Dante's expression softened with pride. The Meridian retrospective is going to be incredible. I'm sorry I'll miss the opening. You'll be there for the next one, Valentine said with complete confidence. As Dante prepared to leave, Valentine felt the familiar pang of worry that accompanied his business trips. She'd learned not to voice her concerns. He had more experience staying alive in dangerous situations than she had worrying about him, but the knowledge of what his work sometimes required never completely left her mind. When he returned 3 days later, tension rolling off him in waves that spoke of violence recently concluded, Valentine didn't ask questions. Instead, she drew him a bath, poured wine, and let him decompress in the sanctuary they'd created together until the hardness gradually left his shoulders and he returned to the man who existed only with her. That evening, as they sat on the terrace overlooking the city with dinner neither had bothered to finish, Dante reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Valentine's breath catch. I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, he said quietly, opening the box to reveal an antique platinum ring set with a brilliant cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones. It was my grandmother's ring, brought from Sicily when she married my grandfather. Valentine stared at the beautiful ring, then at Dante's face, reading nervousness there that she'd never seen before. I know this life isn't conventional, Dante continued. I know that being with me means accepting dangers and complications that most people never have to consider. But I also know that I want to spend whatever time I have left making sure you never doubt how completely you're loved. He slid off his chair to kneel beside hers, taking her left hand with careful reverence. Valentine Ross, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my family? Will you let me spend the rest of my life keeping you safe and making you happy? Valentine felt tears spill over as she looked at this dangerous, tender man who'd rearranged his world around protecting her and loving her completely. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, absolutely yes. Dante's smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger was radiant with relief and joy. And when he kissed her, Valentine tasted the promise of a future that belonged entirely to them. Let me ask you something, and I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between the safe path and the path that led to real love? Because what Valentine discovered is that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is play it safe. Sometimes real protection, real love, real security comes from the most unexpected places. Planning their wedding became an exercise in blending two very different worlds. Dante's family and associates were flying in from Sicily and various American cities, while Valentine's guest list consisted mainly of Lily, gallery colleagues, and a handful of close friends who were still processing the reality of her relationship with a man whose business card would never accurately reflect his actual profession. The ceremony itself was intimate, held in the penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows providing a backdrop of Chicago's skyline. Valentine wore her grandmother's pearl necklace with a dress that managed to be both elegant and practical, while Dante looked devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored black suit that somehow made him appear both sophisticated and slightly dangerous. Lily served as maid of honor, having fully embraced her role as Dante's sister-in-law with enthusiasm that included learning to make his mother's red sauce and developing opinions about his security arrangements that she shared freely and frequently. When they exchanged vows that Dante had written in both English and Italian, promising to protect each other through whatever challenges their unconventional life might bring, Valentine felt the final piece of her new reality click into place. 6 months after their wedding, Valentine stood in the Meridian Gallery during the opening reception for her most ambitious exhibition yet. Watching collectors and critics move through the space, she'd transformed into something magical. Dante stood near the entrance, positioned where he could observe everything while staying far enough back to let her shine in her professional element. She caught his eye across the room and saw the pride there, the deep satisfaction of watching someone he loved succeed on her own terms while knowing he'd provided the security that allowed her to flourish. It was the perfect metaphor for their relationship, his protection creating the foundation for her independence, her success validating his belief that keeping her safe was worth whatever it cost. Later that evening, as they walked hand in hand through the city that had brought them together in the most unlikely circumstances, Valentine marveled at how completely her life had changed. A year ago, she'd been afraid to walk alone after dark, jumping at shadows and constantly looking over her shoulder for Derek's threatening presence. Now she moved through the world with complete confidence, knowing that the man beside her would eliminate any threat before it could touch her, while also knowing that he respected her strength enough to let her handle everything else herself. The platinum and diamond rings on their joined hands caught the streetlight as they walked, symbols of promises kept and futures claimed despite obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. Valentine Ross Moretti had found her protector, her partner, and her permanent sanctuary in the most dangerous man she'd ever met. And every day for the rest of their lives, Dante would make sure she never had to be afraid again.